I just was like, I need to do some research on witchcraft. I was left alone a lot. So this was one of the ways that I would deal with it. I don't know where this got in my head, but I started desiring crystals. We became very close friends, and she introduced me to like a modern day coven. I remember my apartment started humming, and then I heard a bunch of explosions in the kitchen. I had this realization that I needed help, and I knew Jesus was the only God who.
Hello and welcome back to the Almost False podcast, where I interview regular people with incredible stories. Today's guest has had quite an interesting life. She grew up Hindu and converted to Christianity only to become a witch shortly after. We discussed her journey, starting all the way from India to where she is now, and dove deep on what made her make these life-changing decisions. She's had numerous spiritual encounters over the years and warns of the dangers of the New Age practices she used to be involved in. Her name is Ramya, and this is her story. You lived in India for the beginning of your life, and your parents obviously are from there, and they're Hindus. So I want to ask you, how much was Hinduism part of your life as a family, as a child? Was it kind of a label that was your family was getting put on them, or was it something that actually you were practicing?
Yeah, it was definitely practiced in our home. More so even when we lived with my grandparents, it was like I had to go to the temple in our house, and I was expected to pray to a deity before leaving for school. But yes, definitely we practiced Hinduism. We went to temples on the weekend, definitely every occasion. I had like my favorite Hindu god. He's like the god of like studies. So I always wanted to excel at school, and I did. So I prayed to him. But most of the time that I prayed to like the supreme God. And I use the word God in my prayer at bedtime, like in my heart. I didn't pray to some deity, but it was expected that I prayed every morning before I went to school. And it was expected that I had to pray every night before going to bed. It took a back seat when I got to America. We did go to the Hindu temple. We went to the Hindu temple of Florida, and we would really just go on special occasions, but not as much as we did when we lived in India, because here now in this country, we have limited access to like Hindu stuff, right. Especially in the 90s. They're just like that Hindu temple of Florida was actually being built in the 90s. So it was an expectation that I was always Hindu. There was an expectation that I prayed before bed and in the morning, and we celebrated all the holidays and everything. So I would say it was a very normal Hindu Indian upbringing, like as normal as that is.
And being from the Western world, and I'm sure many other people aren't too familiar with the beliefs of Hinduism. I know that it's multiple gods, but how many gods? And in your life and in your parents' life, how does that transpire? Which gods do you choose to pray for? How does it really work? Because I don't fully understand it.
Yeah, it's a very disorganized set of beliefs. It's almost like every family has their own traditions, and it's kind of handed down through the families. And there's also this caste system. So like the Brahmins are at the top of the caste system, and they have the most sacred knowledge, or if that's what you want to call it. And I'm not really sure like where my family even lies in that system. I think we're kind of like mid-tier or mid-low. I don't really know. But there's no true collective set of beliefs. It's not very organized. And obviously there's different schools of thoughts, like different types of yoga like come from Hinduism, and it's always a spiritual practice first. But there's this like weird fact on the internet that's not exactly true, saying that there's 330 million gods. That's absolutely false. There's really only about 300 Hindu gods, but where that discrepancy comes from is one of the ways the different gods are worshipped is one god will have like a million names. So if you
Okay.
go to Hindu school and you're learning the Sanskrit, one of the ways that you learn how to pray is by repeating those different names of that one deity that you're worshiping. So there's this weird disconnect between what they actually say on the internet and what's actually true. But it will be like the same deity in different forms or the same deity with different names. It's almost like a mockery of how we worship our Lord. Like, there's different names of Jehovah, like Jehovah Nisi, Jehovah Sabaoth. Like, he's got many names. So it's just like a counterfeit version of what's holy. And every family has like their deity. My family, my parents follow one, and then my grandparents follow a different one. I had my like little G God that I loved. I loved his stories. Like, I always loved Ganesh, the elephant god, and I loved the story of like how he got his elephant head, and he was supposed to help me with schoolwork and stuff. So I loved it. And that's kind of how it works. But there is a big, I call it false piety. There's a big emphasis on ahimsa, which is non-harm. By the way, Westerners love to bandy about the word karma. And every time you say the word karma, you are also reinstating this belief that you believe in reincarnation. You could only have karma if you believe in reincarnation. Like, I just want to like clarify that Western belief is just, people use that a lot and it bothers me. They don't know what they're saying.
Yes, I have noticed it too, that people use karma as like some good juju and bad juju, but the actual karma is quite different than what most people think it is here. So it's interesting to hear that from you. Well, can you expand just a little bit on what karma actually is?
Yeah. So karma is this idea. So when it comes to all of these other religions outside of Jesus, everything is based on works. So even the Hinduism, it's based on works. Like, you do all these good deeds to kind of like outweigh the bad. And the more good deeds you do, you're building up this good karma so that you can come back reincarnated either as like a human or even better, a cow, where you can like be exalted above all. And then if you do a lot of bad stuff, you come back as like a bug or like a rat or something just really, really lowly, or you get a human life where you just have this life of endless suffering. So your karma is actually for the next life. You catch a little bit in this life, but most of it comes like in your next life. So it's just silly when Westerners like think they know what they're talking about. What you mean is you reap what you sow. Like, that's it. It's just that simple.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. And it's very obvious that you were very religious as a child and your family was very religious, but it wasn't only religion, there was spirituality involved. And what I mean by that is you had some kind of feeling for the spiritual and you had dreams that would happen over and over and over again. Can you explain what these dreams were and how that worked for you as a child?
Yeah. There's one that I recall just very vividly. So my dad had just moved to America and we had just moved into my grandparents' home. And I started getting these dreams, and I would see these two entities like in the dream. In the dream, I would just be in my grandparents' home, like living life as normal. But there were two like demons. One was like, they were dogs that were walking uprightly. One was a green dog. It was so evil looking. And the other one was a white dog with big blue spots. And they were just so like, they just had this presence. They were just so evil. And I would open my eyes and there would be nothing around me. And then I'd go back to sleep and they'd be there. So I suffered with this dream for years. And then I also had this fear of witch doctors. Yes, witch doctors are real in Hinduism. They are scary mountain people and they drink blood. They sacrifice animals. They're crazy. They are unclean. They'll have like scary looking teeth and they live in the mountains. There's a lot of witchcraft in mountains pretty much everywhere you go. And I would get dreams of them doing things. So I just don't know, like, if that meant there was witchcraft being done behind my back. I don't remember exactly where this is in the book of Job, but in the book of Job, it says like dreams. God shows to man what is happening in our world through dreams. So I don't know that these were prophetic dreams. Those kind of came a little bit later. But yeah, I had those recurring dreams constantly.
It's interesting. And, at the very least, it was an introduction to some sort of spirituality, because whether or not these dreams were real or were imagined, you perceive them as being demonic. And that's going to lead to much of your story later down the line. But even at a young age, you got interested into witchcraft. Whether or not that was related to your background in Hinduism, I'm not sure. But at the age of 8 years old, you got interested in witchcraft after reading your first Harry Potter book. Why did that happen? And what was so special about that book that made you want to get into those kinds of practices?
Well, most of the mythological things or these books with imaginary things, I don't think humans are that creative that they can just come up with these things on their own. I don't know, they all have to come from something. They have to be inspired by something. Just humans are not like that creative, just in my opinion. And I knew that there was some truth in it. Like, I don't know what it is, but something went off in my spirit saying there's something deeper here. There's got to be truth behind this. There's no way this lady came up with all this. Like the rituals, the magic, the forces of evil and the forces of light. Like, there's no way. And so I went to the library and I was, again, just a little bookworm. My parents were very happy that I just check out stacks and stacks of books from the library. And so we were living actually way up north at the time. And there were an abundance of libraries in the city. So I just was like, I need to do some research on witchcraft. I'm intrigued. I'm curious. I'm sure it's not all cute and adorable like it is in Harry Potter. So I just started to check out books. And there were books that I checked out on runes, and I checked out books on Wicca. I checked out books on Celtic Druidism. I checked out books on all the Norse gods, the Greek gods, all the mythological things. And I started noticing, like, there was one thing in common all across the board. There was always a worship of a deity, whether it's yourself or a deity of another kind. There was always ritual, and this stuff, like, I'm reading, it's not like nobody's sacrificing babies or little lambs and chickens in their backyard for these rituals. This is like making an altar and using grains and using honey and putting some coins or using these herbs or using these oils. Like, it was a very simple. To me, it's just what I'm seeing is, it's just alchemy. It's just things from the earth. It's nothing bad. Like, this is so interesting. So I'm just like filling myself with this knowledge. And then I'm realizing, hold on, we do this in Hinduism. How could this be bad? How could this be even really antithetical to the Hinduism that I practice now?
Right.
This could actually just be extension of Hinduism. So, like in Hinduism, you do these pujas. They are prayer rituals. And again, you use like different kinds of herbs, like you use turmeric, you use grains of rice, you have ghee, you have milk, and you use honey, and like you're making these altars. So for me, this is not anything too wild out there. And by the way, I want to add, I lived in a tumultuous home. There was friction inside the home that I was also dealing with as a child because my father had completely changed in those 4 years of separation. And so had my mother. And they had their own trauma. So I lived in a tumultuous home. And my sister was just born when I was 9 years old. So I was left alone a lot, or I was like babysitting and helping out a lot. So this was one of the ways that I would deal with it. Like, to me, it was just enrichment. And so I always wanted to feel safe and protected. And I always felt like these Hindu gods, no matter what I prayed to them, they like never answered my prayer. No matter what puja I did, they just didn't care. So I started visualizing, like my favorite one was where I would imagine that I was sitting by a lake and I would just visualize this purple ring of light. And then I started to get creative and I'm like, hold on, there's this whole ritual. I don't have all these things, but I can look up what they look like online and then create the visual in my head. And I don't know where I had this realization as a child, like whatever your mind perceives, like it can't tell the difference between real or fake. So if you visualize it, it's good enough. So I went on that path until I was like 10 years old. But then I got busy. I got busy with school. I started I just didn't have time for it. You know, I just wanted to fit in. I was going through puberty. Like I wanted to wear my cool cargo pants. Like, so I just got distracted from all of that enrichment and put it away for the reminder of the high school era. And I didn't really even pick it back up in college or anything like that. So that was kind of the extent of the learning from Harry Potter. I know that kind of gone off on a tangent, but I just picked up those books and I'm like, this is rooted in some level of truth.
Right. And for someone from here, it might not be as intriguing, or they might not think that it's real as much as you did, because you had firsthand experience of living in India and knowing that these witch doctors were actually doing these things. And you had experience even in your home of doing similar things to that. So when you encountered those books for the first time, it wasn't that foreign to you. So it didn't look like something that was made from a fairy tale. So that's very interesting as to how you got into that. But also, you said you were praying to gods, and I have my own idea, and I'm sure that you do, about who these gods are. But it seems like one time, one of them actually encountered you, but maybe not in the form that you thought it would. It came on a night where you were hanging out with some friends, and there was a horror movie and a Ouija board involved. So can you tell that story of how you felt a demon for the first time?
Yeah, I really hate that experience. So I met these two girls when I was in middle school. So I was in that place where I was just trying to have my own friend group, and whatever they wanted to do, I was just kind of like willing to do, when they weren't really like aligned with my values, like my family values that I was raised with, or like the value that I put on being a good student and working really hard. But anyway, my parents were very reluctant to send me on the sleepover, but they sent me. And these two girls, I don't know why, they were so obsessed with like The Exorcist and The Craft and these like evil demonic movies. And there was one night I was staying in this girl's room, and we had just gotten done watching The Exorcist. I think we also watched The Craft. It's very, very, very late into the night. We were very unsupervised. And I think we also tried to do these things, these little rituals, like throwing water on a mirror in a closed bathroom, like and chanting Bloody Mary. And we also did this like light as a feather, stiff as a board to try and like levitate each other off the ground, which I thought that was so weird, but I went along with it. And then one girl was like, wait, it's time to get the little Ouija board out. Let's have some fun. Let's talk to Slug. And I'm like, who's Slug? And they were like, oh, it's the spirit. We've been communicating with him. He's like from the 1920s and he got ran over by like a horse carriage or something. And I'm like, okay. So we're like making the Ouija board and it's so obvious. These girls are just like moving the Ouija board and I am not amused. And I'm like, this is so stupid. But then there was a shift like in the room, like in the environment of the room. It just got very dark and very creepy. And they're asking him questions and they were like, are you in the room with us right now? And he said, yes. And they said, can you touch one of us? He said, yes. And I felt just tap like on my shoulder, just real as day. It was actually this shoulder. Yes. It was my left shoulder. And I just screamed. And both the two girls like fell over laughing. They're like, what happened? I'm like, I just got touched. And like, after that, I don't think I went back there for another sleepover ever again. Yeah, that was just a really bizarre experience. I'll never forget that.
Yeah, I really don't blame you for not having been back there with them because that's a weird thing to do, to watch horror movies and to play with the Ouija board. So that's totally understandable. But I don't want to move forward in your story. When you became older, as you mentioned earlier, you stopped being into the witchcraft and the spirituality things. You became much more secular and you were focusing on school and you wanted to go to med school. How long did that last? So essentially, at what age did you stop being interested in this spiritual world and you just started focusing solely on school and just other things?
I essentially was over it from 15 years of age all the way to 21, 22 years of age. I couldn't stand them. I thought they were self-righteous. I thought they were stuck up. I didn't understand why I needed saving. I was always a kind person. I always had a heart for charity, heart for helping people. I went out of my way to help others, even if they did me dirty later on. So I didn't know why I needed help. I wasn't doing anything bad. I was like a pretty good kid. I was a pretty honorable kid and I lived a life of integrity. So I didn't understand this idea that I needed saving. And I also had no concept of an enemy or a hell because I wasn't raised with that. I didn't believe in it. There is a concept of hell in Hinduism. You can go to a place that's like hell to pay for some of the crimes you've committed before being released into your next life. But it's not a permanent place. There's no eternal hellfire and torment. And I know that there's also like 4 different words in the Greek version of the Bible that describes hell, but like I didn't know any of that stuff at the time. So I didn't have the concept, but I also did not like how Christians treated me. For example, I'm going to be super vulnerable and I'm going to share stories about my first and second boyfriends in college. My first boyfriend was emotionally very manipulative and abusive, and he had a Christian scholarship when I was a freshman in college, and he actually made me go to church with him every single weekend, and he had me sit in the front pew. He played in the band. He made me go because it would make him look good. And then got out of that relationship, went through a traumatic experience, moved on to my second relationship. And now this man was like a man of God. He just treated me like so well. He prayed so much for me to get saved. And he was from a Pentecostal family in the country. Like these women, they didn't cut their hair. They wore the long skirts. And I hated how his family treated me. They were very ignorant, like probably some bouts of like racism came through some of his more ignorant cousins. They definitely treated me different. They judged me. I had comments about my skin color and I didn't have a very good experience with most of his family, but had a great experience with him. And then I also had a great experience with his grandma and grandpa. And I felt that love of Jesus, like through them. Like they never treated me like I was different. They just loved on me. And I just loved them right back. And that relationship ended. And then, I just was, in my opinion, too young to get married at 21. So, moved on from that relationship and then found myself Christian 2 years later. And I truly believe it's because of this man's prayers for me when I was with him in college.
That's very interesting. And it's quite a sudden change. You went from hating Christians and you kind of had some good reasons because you had bad experiences with people, but it doesn't mean that Jesus is bad. It just means that people are bad and we all make mistakes. I know that you know that now, but a lot of people make that mistake of blaming Jesus for the mistakes that people make. And it's like, no, we're not perfect. And the people that claim to be perfect, then,
right.
They're wrong. but you mentioned it. You kind of said it before I could ask you, but you did accept Jesus not too long after. And it's not the end of the story it's kind of like the middle part. And there's lots of stuff that happened after, but we're going to get into that later. How did you go from hating Christians to all of a sudden accepting Jesus as God? How did that work?
Yeah. I would say that with that boyfriend and my experience with him and his grandparents, my heart softened a little bit. But I wasn't under the impression that I needed God. I felt like I was doing fine on my own. I now am powering through college. I am, student body senator. Like I was starting to rack up accomplishments under my belt. I did well on my MCAT. I had a high GPA. Like, where does God come in this picture? Like, really, my view of God is he's the dude that kind of steps in when you've done all you can. And then, like, if you need that miracle, he steps in. That was kind of my understanding of God. And then fast forward, I had moved to like another city, not to give out spoilers, but there was this girl and she was appropriately named Mary of all things. I have a heart for Mary. And anyway, this girl just had nothing but love and peace and joy. And I was riddled by like testing anxiety for the first time in my life. I went from being an excellent test taker to like having anxiety, but I knew the material. Like I would take the self-assessments and I'd get like hundreds, and then I'd go take the exam and I'd get like a 75. And I was just really struggling. And then I also experienced my first, I want to say that was the only one I've ever had. Or maybe I had two. I can't recall. But I had an actual anxiety attack. Like it felt like I was having a heart attack or something. And I had never experienced that before. And I'm like, something's going on, like with my mentation. Like I'm supposed to have more peace than this. Like, I don't want to feel like this anymore. And I want to like know that I have help. Like, I don't want to feel so isolated and alone in this world. I want to know that there is genuinely some divine being that cares about me, that can help me when I'm in this like state, like I, as a human being, have done everything I could do. And I finally went to Mary and I was like, I'm struggling with this. I'm like, I want to be this kind of person. I want this for my life. And I have been a good person. I have been a charitable person my whole life. And I have done everything I could possibly do as a human being to get into medical school. And now, isn't this a time where like I sit back and I pray and God answers my prayer? Like, I can't do anything more than I could possibly do. And I told her like this vision. I'm like, Mary, my prayers are getting like here, but it's like not getting through. Ow. Stab myself with my fingernail. I'm like, but it's not getting through this barrier. And she said to me, Ramya, I'll tell you my secret. And I was like, yeah, please tell me how you just have all this peace all the time. How? And she's like, honestly, my secret is Jesus. And I'm like, tell me more. I don't even care at this point. Like, tell me more. I'm open. And she's like, well, I don't really want to like sit here and like preach to you and explain all this stuff to you. It might just be too much, but I'm going to get you this little booklet and you can just read it on your own time and then call me and tell me how you feel. And I'm like, okay, sounds good. And she gave me this little booklet and it's probably like 30 pages and it's called Knowing Jesus Christ as Lord. And in this book, there's this like vision of, or this man is like, I don't know if he's like talking to God or whatever, but he has this like vision, this perception that he's driving on the road and like God is letting him know that he's driving in the wrong direction. And like, and the Spirit of God just kind of like overcomes him and he's like moved and he knows that he needs help and that he is a sinner saved by grace, blah, 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 blah. I don't know. I don't even really remember the story that much, but he pulls over to the side of the road and prays the salvation prayer. And I had just like worked out. I was like dirty from the gym and I had this idea and I'm like, you know, I think I'm ready to pray this prayer, but I shouldn't be dirty in front of God. So I should at least take a shower. But something just like overcame me. Like this weight was put in the room. Like this tangible, physical presence came into the room as I started to just read the sinner's prayer. Like I was just trying to read it. I wasn't even like ready to pray it yet, but I started reading it and I just knew that there was a holy presence in front of me. And I saw my unholiness in that moment. And it occurred to me that I had never been exposed to anything holy in my life. So that was a new experience for me. And in that moment, Spirit of God overcame me and I was just moved with tears. I was so touched that this being is in this room with me right now and he loves me and he cares for me and he wants to help me. And then fast forward, you know, my testimony of how I got into med school happened. It wasn't God's plan for me to finish, but he showed up for me in a big way.
Yes, and I want you to talk about this because I want to interrupt this interview to tell you about a new clothing brand, Unashamed. Unashamed is a brand that empowers people to live boldly for the gospel. Stop compromising between look and message. Unashamed gives you both. Browse between many high-quality designs and fabrics to find the perfect piece for you. These designs will only be up for a limited time, so be sure to get yours now at unashamed.ca or by clicking the link in the description. Thank you for supporting our ministry. Now, back to the interview. You heard the audible voice of God. And so it's a long story and you can make it short, but how was hearing the voice of God? How did it sound like? What was it? How did it happen? Because that's something that is pretty rare.
Yes. A lot of pastors and preachers and priests don't even believe in the audible voice of the Lord. But I think my brain is just so malleable and open to receiving. And I knew when I got saved that the God of the universe was in my court, like he was in my corner. I knew that. And I felt this like entitlement almost. And I know that's like a bad word in the world these days, but what happened was I was still waitlisted at these med schools. I went through another breakup, go figure. And all I can think is like med school classes begin at the end of July or the first week of August. Like I'm out here still waitlisted. That's all what's like in my head. And it's July 6th right now. So I am sitting on my twin size bed in the house that I grew up in. And I am like, Lord, but what about med school? It's like the one thing I've always asked you for. But what about med school? And I just felt this pull to like take my eyes and put it like towards heaven, like just through the roof of my home. And I heard July 16th, do not doubt. And I heard like this voice. It did not sound like a still small voice. It literally sounded like thunder. And it put the fear in me. Like it put like a holy fear in me. Like, girl, you better not doubt because God's about to do something for you. And I was like, oh, I think I just heard the voice of God. And I got up. I ran to my mom's room. She's like literally in her room and like reading some religious Hindu book. And I'm like, Mom, I don't want you to worry about my life and worry about my settlement as your daughter. Like, I'm going to get into medical school and everything's going to be okay. And she just like stared at me blankly. And I was like, okay, I'm going back to my room. And I went back to my room. And July 16th rolls around. And now I've got this fear in me. And like, I am cowering. I'm literally just cowering in my bed because I'm so scared that maybe this will happen.
Right.
And I hear again a gentle voice, get out your laptop, pull up your Gmail and wait. And I was like, okay. And I pulled it up. It is 8:33 a.m. July 16th, 2012. And I get this email from this med school saying, hey, we had somebody drop out of the class. Are you still interested in coming here? And I'm like, yeah, I'm coming. I'll be right there. So they were like, okay, great. We're going to put together your matriculation documents. Classes start at this time. Please get your butt over here and find yourself an apartment. And I was like, okay. So I had like 10 days to move, and it was like this crazy triangle shaped move to try and get everything in order and like furniture and like sell my old furniture and furnish my new place. It was so chaotic. But yeah, that was how I heard the audible voice of the Lord.
That's incredible. And it's interesting that you said it sounded like thunder. I think there's something in the Bible about that. I'm not sure, but I've heard that before from other people. So it's interesting to hear that from you. And I want to move on to more of the darker side of your life, because after coming to Jesus, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, and it was not a true coming to Jesus. And we'll get into that. It might have been true and it might have got twisted midway, but you eventually, after all of these things happened, for some reason, you quit med school. But at that point, you had accepted Jesus, but you were interested in the law of attraction and manifestation. Why? And what was so appealing to you?
Yeah, what I didn't understand is how sensitive I would now become in my spiritual feelers after I accepted Christ. Even after I accepted Christ, I did not have a concept of spiritual warfare. I did not have a concept of hell. I did not have a concept of an enemy. I just thought it was like ego. And I wasn't convinced that Jesus was the only way. And And it kind of, there's a lot to unpack, but I'll give it to you in a chronological order. So now that I had accepted Christ, I wanted to be like this good person for him. Like I wanted to like impress him with how good I am. And I started watching Oprah's Super Soul Sunday, and I also was working out a lot. But now, of all things, this is so bizarre. I never had any interest in yoga as a Hindu woman, but now I did because Oprah said it was awesome. So I went out and I bought some Bayam yoga videos and I started doing yoga and meditation that summer. And then my friend, he introduced me to Gabrielle Bernstein. She had a book called May Cause Miracles. And so I purchased that book, and that led me into the self-help section of Barnes and Noble. So I just kind of started getting used to these other schools of thought. And then I met this girl in med school, and she had a book on the law of attraction. And it just seemed really interesting. It was called The Key. And it's not the same as The Secret by Rhonda Byrne, but this one was called The Key. So I borrowed that and went through it. And now my mind is like kind of storming a little bit. And then I had to move states away. I am starting med school, which is really difficult. There is a lot of temptation for me. And I was newly single, and church wasn't really like on my mind. But then I had some hiccups in med school, like academically. So I started going to church. This was like a non-denominational church, but it was really like a Baptist church, masquerading as a non-denominational church. And there was hardly any teaching about the Old Testament. It was always New Testament only. And I started to struggle because now I'm like, hold on, why do I need this Jesus guy? I'm confused. And then on top of that, I'm experiencing like prophetic dreams more than I ever have. Like I would think of something and it would happen like in 3 days. No, there weren't always dreams. I guess some of them were more like visions or just like thoughts I would have, and they would happen. And then I was just really confused. And one of the girls I was going to church with, she's like, you don't really need to worry about the Old Testament. Like, that's like for the Jews. And we're Christians. Like, we just do New Testament stuff. And I was like, then why do we need Jesus? Like, why is sin bad? And I was so confused. And I'm like, well, maybe I was just supposed to be Christian for like this past year. And now I'm going to go try something else. And I don't know where this got in my head, but I started desiring crystals. It wasn't a thought somebody gave to me. It was, I was just genuinely drawn to crystals, which led me to an occult supply shop, which led me to other practices, which led me to Akashic records, which led me to tarot cards, oracle decks, divination, scrying, mediumship, Doreen Virtue, who is now a Christian, by the way, praise the Lord. It just took me spiraling. And that new age community like welcomed me with these huge loving arms. Whereas in the Baptist church, I went to like this old couple who invited me and my fellow student girlfriend to their home for like brunch. And they were like making fun of Hindus and stuff. And I'm like, I didn't choose my background. The Lord chose my background. I don't know why you have to say these things about my background. Like, and I just really started to, again, develop that distaste for holier than thou Christians and just ignorant people making rude comments. And through this like occult supply shop, I not only was received with open arms, I was received very well into the spiritualist church, which all of them are technically Christian, but you'll walk in and there'll be a cross, but then they'll have like a banner with like chakras. And they were mixing and matching different forms of spirituality. And I quite like that because now I didn't have to choose between Hinduism and Christianity because I had never come clean to my parents about it either. Like I never shared it with my parents. They just thought I was Hindu. So that was the community I became a part of. And I didn't know at the time, the place that I went to med school was 1 hour away from the largest congregation of mediums in the world. It's called Lilydale Assembly in Cassadaga, New York. And so I started making pilgrimages to Lake Cassadaga and staying at Lilydale Assembly and just started mingling with the mediums and started taking classes, started going to their healing temples and doing all this crazy stuff. And then I also started finding or attracting now at this point, I'm full out like practicing spells, witchcraft, like rituals. I had an altar. And now I was attracting more witches into my life. And there's a lot of witches that work at MAC Cosmetics. And I found one awesome lady who also was a witch at the counter, and I had a great connection with her. And there was no MAC Cosmetics in that town that I was living in. So she would actually be my person, and she would package up these beautiful orders for me, and she would put in all this extra stuff for me that she had access to and send it to me. And we became very close friends. And she introduced me to like a modern day coven there. So I had like a modern day coven in my hometown when I visit home. And then I also had another modern day coven in like the place where I went to med school in that city in Pennsylvania. And it just became a lot. I just got involved in a lot of wrong practices. I'm going to be pretty open about those experiences. So feel free to shoot your questions.
Yeah, I do have questions about that. But my first question is, what does a witch coven look like nowadays? I imagine it's different from the movie kind of thing, because that's usually how it is. But you haven't been in one or visited multiple. How is it? What are you doing there? Can you explain it?
Yeah. So the modern day coven is not going to be a bunch of ladies naked in the woods dancing like on a full moon, sacrificing some goat or deer or whatever. I'm sure that's still in existence, but that's not the sexy modern day. Like that's not really a thing that I'm aware of. The modern day covens often are circles of women that are very intentional. And this is what's happening in your local Reiki massage parlor. It's going to be a bunch of women getting together, having a collective meditation, a visualization. They're going to probably have an altar. They're probably going to have a story to tell. There might be like some bath salts that are created. This is what the circle in my whole town really like to do. So what they would do is every woman gets to pick either like 3 things, like an oil, an herb, either like 2 oils and an herb or all herbs or 3 oils, whatever. They would pick them. And there would be like a collective basket of bath salts, like just usually like Epsom salts or whatever. And they're putting it in with their hands and they're visualizing, they're manifesting their intention into the salt. And then oftentimes they'll have a batch of bath salts from like the previous circle and they'll mix it in. And so everybody goes home with a little baggie of bath salts. And when you need that intention, that power, you take a bath with it and you feel great. So that's like the modern day circle. And then usually there is at least one person who is either operating in divination or mediumship of some sort, like kind of like a crone, like kind of a mother hen of the tribe. And you can go and ask her the questions that you might have, or you can go see another one that's in as a medium. So that's going to be available to you. And usually there's also like a roped off section where you can either scry or use a black, like scrying is really weird. I can go ahead and expand on that for you if you'd like.
I've never heard of it, so you could, but it's going to dovetail to the question I wanted to ask you anyway. So essentially, you're saying a coven is a group of women, for the most part, that get together and do rituals that from the outside seem to be innocent. You engaged in a lot of things. You mentioned some earlier. Can you name a few of the witchcraft practices that you engaged in? And can you explain why you think that no one should do these things?
Yes. Oh, there's so many stories. Basically, what I ended up doing is I found myself putting a lot of band-aids, like spiritual band-aids, temporary band-aids for what seemed to be permanent problems. Like, for example, if I felt depleted in energy or I felt like my happiness levels were low, what I would do is go run out and go buy a whole bunch of yellow candles, and I would dress it with like these herbs and oils, and then maybe call on a deity that I needed at that time and offer it up to them as a sacrifice, and I would light them. One of the times that I did that, maybe I overdid it. There was such a heavy presence in my home present when I ended up lighting a bunch of yellow candles. And I think they were also pre-blessed. Like they might have came from like, I don't know, some witchcraft hoodoo company, because I bought them at the occult supply store. And I remember like my apartment started humming, like there was like a humming, buzzing sound. And then I heard a bunch of explosions in the kitchen, and like the glass pillars that I was putting the candles in had exploded. They had literally exploded, and I blew them out. And I texted the two sisters. This is like the, I guess, coven that I had in Pennsylvania. But I texted them, and I was like, this is happening. And they were like, no worries. You just did a little bit too much. Why don't you just open the windows and let it air out for a couple hours? So I opened all the windows, even though it was 15 degrees outside. And I left my home for a couple hours and, and came back to it, and everything seemed okay. But I also remember like, just going to bed with so much anxiety that night. It didn't feel very good. So that was one of the nights.
Well, I want to know why, because obviously today you would caution anyone that wants to get into any of these kinds of practices. But from someone that has been in those circles, that has done these things, I want to I want to have your take on what these things truly are, and are they as innocent as what they seem to be like on the outside?
These deities always demand more and more and more. So you'll get into one practice, but then you'll find, oh, I need to go do something else. Oh, I need to tap into my Akashic records. Oh, I need to heal this chakra. Oh, I should take that mediumship class. Oh, I should like charge all my crystals in the moonlight tonight. And oh gosh, I should get my natal chart done. Oh gosh, like I should scry with the pendulum. Oh, I need to use my pendulum to fix my chakras. Like it will just take you on this never ending goose chase, and nothing will ever satisfy you. You will actually become super addicted to divination. And another thing, when you're involved in witchcraft, you are sowing great seeds of destruction into your life. And I can tell you, when everything that I was involved in, I sowed seeds of destruction into my career, because it was actually my career that brought me into this line of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that journey that I made for my career is what led me down this path. So that's actually what I ended up destroying, is that work that I had built for my life. It was through sowing these great spiritual seeds of just destruction.
So from what you're saying, it seems like the healing is only a band-aid for a temporary amount of time, and actually it makes the wound deeper inside. And also the things that you build from a foundation of witchcraft are things that are extremely frail and will crumble. So that's what it seems to be your message. And so you realize that, and then after that realization, you went all in for God for good now, for real.
Yeah. The realization came June of 2017. And I just had this like moment, like, what am I doing? None of these deities love me back. They're just taking from me, and they're not giving anything in return. In fact, I'm falling deeper and deeper in the hole. I'm completely obsessed and addicted to divination. I don't think I have my spiritual gifts anymore from the Lord. And I was also seeing psychics. Like, I don't think I've shared that ever on my channel, but not only was I reading my own cards constantly, not only was I meditating with my crystals, trying to like see into some future, like constantly, not only am I obsessed with divining for myself, I'm obsessed with divining for others. I also am obsessed with being addicted to having my cards read. So I had this realization that I needed help, and I knew Jesus was the only God who truly loved me and did not demand anything from me except to love him back. So that was when the tide started to shift. And then I went through a traumatic incident in July of 2017. And that kind of like scrapped the plate clean. And I made the decision to drop out of med school. And yeah, and that's what has kind of propelled me to today. And when I turned back to him, it was like, okay, I am all in. Like, I am all in for you. I want to walk the straight and narrow. And the reason I turned back to him is there was this lady preaching on Periscope, and she was talking about the book of Daniel. And she said, like, the greater the calling, the higher the spiritual warfare. And that really resonated with me, because I had been in this like spiritual war. Mm-hmm. I just didn't know what side I was even on. And she continued to talk about the book of Daniel. And I was like, hold on. She's talking about the Old Testament. I thought that was just what the Jews needed. And I was like, I need to dig deeper. And I started to read the Old Testament, and all of a sudden, all of the New Testament came to life for me. You can't have the new without the old. You can't, like, the whole like New Testament is like fulfillment of prophecy. And so just reading the Old Testament helped me so much. Like, it just helped me realign myself with God and realize that I was deceived for so many years. And yeah, that's how my journey back to the Lord began. And then I went through a really ugly deliverance journey of 2.5 years of breaking off covenants from all of these old demonic things that I had ties with, getting rid of all of the occult supply stuff, going back to church, and working through trauma. And because there were other things that I went through, working through some of these experiences. And people, the reason they struggle to have faith sometimes is they have a hard time reconciling their human experience with a supernatural God. So a lot of those 2.5 years was just me making sense of my experience, me understanding my experiences through the eyes of God to help me get to where I am. And I knew one day God was going to call me to a public platform, which obviously, brought this interaction with you. And yeah, like that's kind of where I'm at right now.
And in your own testimony on your own channel, if people want to watch it, I recommend that they go over to your channel and watch it, because it doesn't talk about exactly the same things, and you go into more detail in certain specific stories. But you mentioned some kind of Book of Job story, and by talking to you, I'm realizing that what happened, or at least you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the things that you had built from witchcraft, when you gave your life fully to God the second time, these things crumbled, they fell apart, and either the demons took them away or God took these things away from you for your good. And so that was a period of time where a lot of things were crumbling and it was really hard. And to some extent, I think you would say that you're still reaping some of the things that you had sown way back when you were doing witchcraft. So it's not just that these things are bad in the present. These things impact you down the line. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. People don't have, I don't think the church teaches a good understanding of how covenants operate in the realm of the supernatural. As you know, I'm a big proponent of Robert Henderson's Courts of Heaven teaching. And the thing is, we need to only really have one covenant. We need to have our covenant with the Lord Jesus Christ. And when the time comes, it's going to be with your spouse. That's going to be like your secondary covenant. But what happens is people don't tell you when you give your life back to the Lord is the amount of backlash that you get from the occult. I think it was the backlash from the occult that kind of stole, a different path God had for me to be a physician. But God is still using that for my good. So I know that one of my callings in life is to be a Job, so people can witness my double restoration in my life, so that they can witness God rebuilding my life. This is really interesting. When I was 13, the first book I ever read of the Bible was the Book of Job. And that's because it was actually assigned as an honors English reading before I started high school. I started high school when I was 13. So I remember when we got the list of summer book reading, and I was like, what's the Book of Job? Like, I don't know where that is. And I went to the library and they were like, ma'am, that's a book from the Bible. And I was like, why are they making us read religious stuff? I was so confused. And then I read it. I was like, wow, this is really depressing.
It is. If you don't understand the full context, it is.
So it's just kind of ironic that the story of Job is kind of a story that I play out in my life. And I'm still in the rebuilding phase. And, I am always praying to the Lord to spare me the consequences of my sin. Sometimes he answers and sometimes he doesn't. So we'll just kind of see where it goes.
Yeah. But you'll be rewarded in the end, and those things will go away at some point, whether it's in this life or the next one. But your story is fascinating. And I have so many more questions, and I'll ask more in the after show. But we've been going for a while, and I want to ask you this final question. You loved books ever since you were a child. So I want to ask you the specific question for you. If your life was a book, what would be the moral of the story?
Oh, that is so difficult. God is not a legalist, but Satan surely is. Be careful what you dabble with.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. Satan's always looking for legal ground to accuse you in the courts of heaven. If he can find legal ground, he doesn't even need to ask God for permission to torment you. When I heard from the Lord in 2016 that Florida is my promised land, I was waiting for God to hand me the keys and the doors to open up for me so that I could enter my promised land. But I was feeling this blockade and I wasn't sure like where it was coming from. I just, again, was feeling the spiritual barrier that I just didn't have access to the state of Florida. And I like tapped in, I prayed, and I tapped into the courts of heaven. And I was like, my Lord, what is the legal ground that's stopping me from entering the state of Florida? And I was accused. Now, this is like late 2018. And I'm like going down the line, I'm breaking these old covenants with these demon gods like Hecate and like all these other like false gods that I was just serving, and I was told in the course of heaven, you have a covenant with a deity other than the Lord. And I'm like, that's not possible. I've broken everything. How is it even possible? And what was revealed to me is there was a book report that I had to do in like 4th or 5th grade where we were learning world history and we were allowed to pick out our favorite Greek god or goddess and talk about why that's our favorite one. And I had created a covenant saying that I admire this goddess for her wisdom. It was the Greek goddess Athena. She was very wise. Like, I'm always chasing wisdom. And that was used as a tangible covenant in the realm of the spirit to speak against me in the courts of heaven. So I had to break that covenant. And I denounced it. I was like, no, I rebuke that. I denounced this covenant. And in fact, I want it severed. And I re-yoke myself to Christ alone. And just like that barrier that was acting against me was removed. So Satan will go using the most innocent things against you. Like you got to be like, if you got kids, you got to be watching like what they're writing in their school assignments. Like you better be watching what books they're checking out of the library. Like you got to be really careful. There's only so much protection you can do as a parent. But in my experience, a lot of it was that my parents weren't really checking me. They just think it's great that their kids reading a lot of books. They think it's great that their kids excelling at school. But the Christian worldview needs to shift. The Christian view on parenting needs to shift. You have to be careful what you dabble with. Every action that you take is a seed in the realm of the spirit. Like if you look in the Bible and there's a lot of verses about sowing and reaping. So you got to be careful what you dabble with. God's not a legalist, but Satan most definitely is. If he can use something against you, he most certainly will.
But I think in general, you wouldn't say be paranoid. I think you would say be careful and be intentional as to what you put out in the world and the things that you say and you do, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Almost False podcast. If you still have questions about this story, join us on Locals for the after show where you can ask questions directly to our guests. Also, come join our Discord community and hang out with us. It's an awesome place to find and interact with like-minded people. If you're interested in sharing your story and being on the show, you can go to almostfalse.net to submit it. And if that sounds intimidating, consider taking a free online course on how to share your testimony more effectively. All those links will be in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Stay blessed.